have met many of you through Women's Weekend. For those of you I have not met, my name is Jen Chambers. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Lifelong Learning at Duke Alumni Engagement and Development. As part of my work, I do oversee the Women's Weekend program, so that's maybe where I've seen you before. I also work on our regional programs, getting faculty out into the regions. And this semester, we launched a new program called the Forever Learning Institute. This program is actually part of that institute under one of the 4 themes that we have. The theme for this evening's conversation is under the human experience. We also have programming in America Today, advancing health and wellness, and social movements and change agents. Over the course of the semester, that program has 50 different faculty speakers in it. So if you want a chance to sort of be curious and stretch your intellectual mind a bit, there's lots of programming for you out there all semester long. We're offering it at different times of the day to try to make things convenient no matter where you live or what your work schedule is like. And all of the sessions are going to be recorded. So if for some reason you aren't able to join us live, you'll get the link in the follow-up email the next day where you can watch that content. So tonight I have the great privilege of hosting a session I've actually wanted to do before on guilty pleasures. This is a topic we wanted to squeeze into the last Women's Weekend and we just couldn't make it work, but I think the topic is relevant now more than ever. So with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator for this evening's program. Her name is Rachel Braun Scherl. She's class of 1987. She's the CEO of Spark Solutions for Growth. She's a business builder, a marketing strategist. She's a speaker, an author of Vagipreneur, which I believe is a term she coined. And she has expertise in women's sexual and reproductive health. Rachel is also a committed volunteer to the Duke community. She is a speaker on campus. She works with students. She's been actively engaged in the Innovation and Entrepreneurship program, and I am delighted that she was able to moderate today's session. So with that, I will turn it over to Rachel and our panelists for this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jen. It's great to be here. Do you hear an echo? I hear an echo.
We're good.
Nope. Okay. I'm delighted to be here moderating today's panel. It combines a lot of things that I care about, which is women, leadership, and Duke. The name of the panel is Guilty Pleasures, Embracing What We Want and Need. And the goal is not to talk so much about what brings women pleasure, which we will discuss, but why we both feel guilty and sometimes make others feel guilty for seeking the things that bring us joy, rest, escape, comfort, and relaxation. You know, when Jen asked the question at the beginning, what would you do if you had an hour? You know, no one's saying they're, running away and, doing drugs in a corner. People just want an hour to read a book. So we have a lot to dig into, and I'm joined by an amazing panel of Duke experts, psychologists, philosophers, award winners. In this conversation, we'll focus on the parts of our life that give us enjoyment and, importantly, the factors that stand in our way from doing that. So I am delighted to introduce our talented, experienced, and dynamic panel of entrepreneurs and thinkers and business leaders from the Duke community that I have never met until we were connected through this panel. So it'll be a great learning for me as well. So first off, Tonya Armstrong, who has a master's in theological studies from Duke, and she's the founder of the Armstrong Center for Hope. She's a licensed psychologist, a counselor, and a minister focused on counseling children and families on a wide range of emotional issues. So just imagine how much we have to talk to. Tonya could be her own panel just by herself. Next, we have Katherine Brophy Dubois, who is a graduate from Duke. She is the best-selling novelist of 23 historical romance novels, which she writes under the pseudonym Catherine Ash, and she's a lecturing fellow of history and popular culture at Duke. I just talk about pop culture for free. I didn't know I could be a professor, so I'll look into that. And last but not least, McLean Pollock, who's an assistant professor, psychiatry and behavioral sciences from the Duke School of Medicine, in addition to being award-winning doctor of philosophy with a concentration on maternal and child health, as well as a master's of public health and master's of social work. So I feel a little inadequate with one graduate degree with this group, but I'll do my best to plow through. So welcome. Thank you so much for all being here tonight.
Sure, thank you.
In the work that we do, and we're obviously in a bunch of different fields, we deal with human emotions, whether it's in the workplace, in the family, in religious institutions, in healthcare settings, in the boardroom or in the bedroom, which is probably the area that I will talk about that might not be something the other panelists talk about. So I'm curious, and Katherine, I'm going to start with you. What is the primary guilty pleasures, or what are the things that you see people struggling with? I mean, we know women's health involves so many different systems: behavioral, psychological, emotional, contextual. And not surprisingly, you describe the genre of romance fiction as principally about emotional pleasure, but also about these other areas of a woman's life: social, intellectual, and physical pleasure. Why do women consider romance reading, and even reading in general, a guilty pleasure? Why is that something that we have to make excuses for doing?
It's a great question, Rachel. I think we are in general often told that our pleasures are less important than other pleasures. I think that we often feel responsible to others, and in feeling responsible to others, somehow feel as if we are not supposed to be responsible to ourselves. And we're overextended in many cases. We have so many things to do. There simply isn't time to please ourselves. I think one of the reasons that in the romance world, one of the reasons that readers voraciously read romances, and many romance readers will read multiple books, certainly multiple books a month, but sometimes multiple books a week. They'll, chain read them the way that we binge watch a show. And by the way, for anybody who's been binge watching during the pandemic, I stayed up almost all last night binge watching Bridgerton. So, which is based on a series of historical.
Well, the Duke is
novels.
hosting SNL this weekend, so.
Oh, right. Okay, so perfect timing. Yeah. So, what I hear in the romance community is that women will read, and so many of us put in the chat that we would just get a book and go someplace by ourselves, take a walk by ourselves with the dog, a book by ourselves. Something about diving into a work of fiction, and a work of fiction that is intended to make us feel good. It's intended to take us through the emotions, powerful emotions, painful emotions, difficult things, but ultimately romance, genre romance, it always has to have a happy ending. And the purpose of it is something that differentiates it from a lot of other types of fiction, is that it is about bringing together the disparate parts instead of celebrating or studying or exploring the sort of fractured reality that we actually live in, which a lot of literature does. Romance fiction brings together those parts in the persons of the individuals who are in the romantic relationship, whether that's two or three or whoever is in that romantic relationship.
So
it's about integration.
When you're writing these books and talking about these books, is part of the guilty pleasure, and I hear this in my work, that what is described or portrayed in beautifully written romance novel bears little or no resemblance to the experience a woman in this case is actually having in the context of her own relationship or her own bedroom. And, the wind isn't blowing her hair, and everyone's not having simultaneous orgasms. And it's a different experience than certainly perhaps Bridgerton.
I think that is often what is said of romance. And there's certainly a continuum of romance, from the very fantastical, where the characters are vampires or demons or lords or what have you, to the very realistic, where the characters are doing things like we're doing. They're on their Zoom meetings too. Romance ultimately is about the emotional experience, and the emotions are real. Whether you are riding in a carriage to a ball in the 19th century with a handsome duke, or whether you're walking the dog down a path in the woods, the emotions we're feeling and the emotions that are expressed in romance fiction feel very real to readers. And it is ultimately this profoundly emotional experience. And like I said, it's about bringing together the different parts. It's about solving conflict. It's about empowering women to feel pleasure. And the heroines in romance fiction novels, and heroes too, but heroines in romance fiction novels, they are empowered in their own pleasure. They're allowed to feel pleasure. They're supposed to feel pleasure. So it's reaffirming in that way too, in many ways. Yeah.
And again, certainly in the work that I do in these businesses that often touch on arousal, desire, and satisfaction, even knowing what that is, what it feels like, how to find it, what you might use to help you succeed, is something that we don't often talk about.
Right.
McLean, your work focuses on treating the whole family. We're going to get out of the bedroom and the romantic experiences. We have heard so much discussion during COVID as to the increasing and essentially almost unbearable stressors that women are facing. Not only are they doing all the other jobs they were doing before, as are men, everybody is overextended, but now they're homeschoolers. You don't have to carpool, so that might be a plus. There's the constant pressure of the day not seeming to end. Is there time for pleasure in this environment, guilty or otherwise?
So I have to say yes and no, which is probably not the answer you want. And I say that just because there's no quick fix to this. This is a real experience that a lot of us are having. So in the work that we're doing with healthcare providers who are working with patients with COVID, and they're really in this crisis mode, the first thing that we talk about with them is how do you handle the self-care that's about necessity. So have you had a drink of water? Have you had rest? Have you had food? Have you moved around? So all these things that need to be addressed first. But once you get past that, to get to real self-care, real rejuvenation, you need to have dedicated time and space for that. And I think that what your question gets to, and in part, is this disparity that, I apologize for my background noise, is the disparity that that men and women face with the unpaid labor that women tend to do more than men. And so that includes, household chores and caring for children and elderly, but also the emotional labor, the caring and the planning that's just constantly in your head. And so then you pair that with how we're kind of teaching women that their value in part is in taking care of others. So what that translates into is that means that you should not be taking care of yourself because you should be making room for others at all times. And so I think for a number of people that really works well for them, for some women that this is a true kind of part of their identity. But then for a number of us, that when we try to take care of ourselves, we feel selfish. We feel like we're bad people. And that we don't know how to take care of ourselves without multitasking at the same time. I think you've maybe seen that article about women who are starting to get angry about seeing posts about how I'm taking care of myself at midnight, going to the grocery store, or my children and partner are sleeping. Well, okay, technically you have alone time, but that's not really self-care. That's not really taking care of yourself.
At the beginning of COVID, there were a stream of emails that said, I lost 72 pounds. I gave up sugar. I stand on my head 6 hours a day. And I read, how are you? And people were writing in the comments, shut up. That doesn't sound anything like my life. Are you seeing increased levels of anxiety in the work that you do during COVID?
Yes, absolutely. Symptoms of anxiety and depression have shot up. And I think that has in part to do with the chronic stress that we're experiencing with COVID. And that's just, we don't have the means to cope in the same way that we do when we're able to be with others and go out of the house and take care of ourselves that way.
It strikes me as that we've fallen pretty far when in a conversation around guilty pleasure, speaking to healthcare workers includes getting a drink of water as somehow indulgent. Tonya, in your work, you do a lot of work with children and families. What are you seeing as some of the many, many factors that are right now, I'd say exacerbated during COVID, that are interfering with families experiencing pleasure, either as individuals in the family or together as a unit?
So I do work with families and in particular women. And one of the things that I hear very constantly from mothers is how often they are challenged to create that time for themselves. And the absence of the opportunities for true self-care then have an impact on how the family time is perceived. And so often, at the Armstrong Center for Hope, we're encouraging our clients to have a dedicated time where they actually do protect their family time, because it's sort of counterintuitive. We kind of feel like, well, we're with each other constantly. Do we really need to be intentional about that? But we encourage that. And what happens is that gives opportunities for continued socialization, especially for our children who are mostly lacking that, a true sense of that during virtual learning. It also gives an opportunity for checking in on each other emotionally, getting a pulse of how our partners, our children are doing. And the sort of beautiful part of creating some protected time for that family, however it may be configured, is that it then also frees up time when that's not happening for families and mothers and women in particular to have that downtime. I am the author of a book entitled Blossoming Hope, The Black Christian Woman's Guide to Mental Health and Wellness. And the reason that I wrote that book was because I was noticing most of my clientele are Black women and Black families, and noticing that I think there is this universal sense, especially as North Americans, to produce. That is what we are here for. We exist to be human doings rather than human beings. And so that uber pressure all the time to be productive actually contributes to this generalized sense of not being able to take on the simple pleasure of good rest, for example. And it also contributes, particularly within African American communities, this sense of needing to be the superwoman, or we've also used in the literature the idea of the strong Black woman syndrome. And so the idea of being able to step away from that and to recognize that, for example, rest is a really important thing. On one hand, it's not, if you just think about sort of hours of sleep, those are necessary. We see a lot of correlation between people's sleep deprivation and decrement in their emotional functioning. So to be sure, it is a need, but I want us to think about rest in much broader terms, to think about rest as a pleasure in terms of doing the activities that were mentioned in the chat, connecting with nature outdoors, even during this wintry weather that we're having, or being able to spend time getting a massage, however that can happen during COVID, right? I'm trying to figure that out. Or doing things like deep play or reflection on things that don't have to do with our work, or enjoying music, which is one of my
So how do you do
pleasures.
that though, when you're in a situation where you have all these roles, including additional ones?
Mhm.
Many people during COVID are under increased financial stress. They have increased anxiety. How do you carve out 6 hours for sleep, or an hour for deep play? And I'd love you to describe what deep play actually is.
Yes, yes. So it is something that individuals have to be intentional about. And usually, when I'm talking with my clients in therapy, I am encouraging them to be very strategic. So let's look at your day. Let's look at how, okay, maybe you gained a little bit more time in your commute now that you're not doing that. But you also now have these extra demands. You're a teacher, as well as having to be on more Zoom meetings than you could ever imagine. And so we have to look concretely at where are the windows of time that this can happen? How do we protect that time? If you told your auntie that you were going to do something for her, you'd make sure it got done. But if it's you, and if it's your reading time, it's your bath, are we honoring it in the same way? So usually it's a matter of sort of gentle accountability, just to make sure that the things that we intend to do, we can carve out and protect to some degree.
So it's a goal. It might be hard to
Absolutely.
accomplish, but it's a goal.
Absolutely.
McLean, I'm curious, what are you seeing, or have you seen historically during very high stress times? What are the potential long-term costs as a society of living under the current level of stress? And again, it could be for any number of reasons. And it's not like COVID is the only thing that people are stressed about, but it seems to have exacerbated everything that's going on. What are some of the implications of that? And what can people do to relieve some of that stress, or sort of turn down the pressure a little bit?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so again, to recognize that we are under chronic stress right now. And so what that translates into is that the demands that we're experiencing outweigh the resources to deal with them. and that it's been lasting for a long time. There's no clear end in sight, and that takes a toll on us. So we have this physiological response to stress. And if we have, constant continual stressors that keep coming at us, then we never get to a place where we can feel safe and return to normal functioning. And so what that does to the body is, in the short term, that can manifest as, digestive issues, sleeplessness, anger, and then in the long run, it has even more implications on your health. So things like heart disease or diabetes, anxiety, hypertension, just to name a few. So it really does take a toll. And along with that is, we tend to not engage in the health protective behaviors when we're under chronic stress. And then we tend to engage in more of those risk-taking behaviors as a way to handle what we're feeling.
Well, that was my next question. I certainly see in my space, we see two extremes, that people are engaging in much more intimacy, and there's increases of sales and sex toys and related products that go with it. On the other extreme, there's people who are so stressed for a many number of reasons, and they don't want to be near anybody. We also hear that we'll either have a divorce boom or a baby boom, or both. Are you seeing, I know I've seen in the business literature that there's certainly an increase in use of alcohol. Are you seeing that with antidepressants as well? And what are some of the other riskier behaviors that you're seeing people struggling with now?
Right, and those are great points. I think we are seeing that. We are, along with kind of increases in anxiety and depressive symptoms, we are seeing more people being prescribed medication for anxiety and depression. We are seeing, alcohol, substance misuse increasing as well, as that is just where people are landing with trying to deal with what's happening to them. And I'm sorry, what was the other question you had?
I'm wondering, do we see increases, and you said in riskier behaviors besides drugs and alcohol, which obviously are risky enough, are there other things that you're seeing, that increases in certain kinds of behavior that cause you some concern?
Well, I think one that I hear a lot about is people feeling like they're not able to eat in a healthy way, that food has turned into comfort, and they're also not happy with the choices that they're making. And so in that way, that's been one way that people are coping, that I think in the long run can have implications that they don't want to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think you would ask something about kind of techniques, or what I kind of suggest to people that I've been working with. I think there have been 4 main ones that I bring up. And the first one is just movement. I don't even say exercise. Exercise is great, but the first one is movement. And if you can do it outside so you can get some vitamin D, that's even better. Start small if you need to. Just try to get, I think we've mentioned that Zoom meetings can go back to back to back if you're working from home, and that's your modality of work. And that can take a toll on you if you're sitting all day long. And so to try to incorporate movement. The second one I would say is, don't accept things into your life that you don't need to. Stop saying yes to everything. Really think about, is this something I can handle right now? Is this something I want to handle right now? And if it doesn't need to happen, you don't have to say yes to it. And I think the third one I would say is, and I think I mentioned this before, but when trying to think of setting a new goal for yourself, to really start small so that you can start to feel success towards that goal. So instead of, I'm going to go run a 5K, it's, I'm going to get some running gear, and then I'm going to put it on. And then the next step is, I'm going to step outside my door. So really just make sure that you feel success and that you're building towards that. And then the final one I would say is to seek social support. So as hard as it can be to say, I'm going to be on another meeting, I'm going to call you because that'll make me miss not being able to be with you. Having that social support can be really helpful, to be able to say to someone who cares about you, this is my experience and this is hard. You're probably going to hear back, yeah, me too. This is hard and I'm not alone. So I strongly encourage that as well.
I've seen a number of interviews with CEOs and business leaders who say they now start meetings very simply saying, how are you? And that I just find it so amazing when you're talking about standing up, not even moving. We're making the bar so low, which concerns me that we're so far away from pleasure that even the simplest act is moving us towards that. So it sounds like we have a long way to go. Katherine, in your work is about pleasure, people experiencing pleasure, people are getting pleasure from what you write. You know, what inspires you? And even though it sounds glamorous and romantic, it still is work. What inspires you to continue to find pleasure in your work, which I'm sure is probably a requirement for communicating and writing about and creating stories about pleasure?
That's a great question, Rachel. I'd say others, and this has been my experience in the pandemic, and this seems counterintuitive. This seems like just exactly the opposite of what McLean said, but I think it's actually, it's fundamental in a way for us who are very accustomed to taking care of others, right? To, as you've said, and I can't say it the same way, so I'm not even going to try to paraphrase what Tonya and McLean have just said about this, how we are often feel a responsibility to others before ourselves. So we tend to neglect ourselves or put ourselves in another category than Aunt so-and-so because, you know, we're not responsible to ourselves in that same way. Making a choice to think in terms of when I'm doing my work, to go back to your question, Rachel, when I'm doing my work, when I'm teaching, when I'm in the classroom, or when I'm preparing for class or grading papers, or when I'm doing the research and writing my fiction, or, you know, editing my tweets or what have you for social media, as one does, I'm thinking about the others who will take joy in it. And I'm thinking about the others who will get something out of it. And because of that, and I don't know how to explain it, but because of that, it makes it feel more satisfying. I enjoy it thoroughly myself, but I'm also, I don't know, maybe it's just that it is hardwired in to feel the joy in what others are experiencing. But again, and I have to, maybe I'll go back. I've learned so much from writing romance heroines, because, you know, of course you write them as much better people than at least than I'll ever be. But I've learned from these women I've invented, and the women I've invented are composites of all the women and men I've known, right? All the wonderful pieces and bits and parts of people. And I've learned that that you can be strong and joyful in your own activities and the things that bring joy to you, while also pleasing others. In other words, it's that same intricative sort of experience of fundamentally part of the romance novel.
So as you're creating that and experiencing the pleasure and bringing pleasure, what do you do when you need a break? You have a number of roles. I neglected to mention that you also have a PhD in religious history in between your other activities. How do you find room for your own pleasure? What does that look like?
Thank you for asking that. I turn things off. I turn off work. And I just turn it off. I turn off work. I turn off serving others. I've learned to speak. I've learned
What
to
does
say,
that specifically look like? Is your phone in a drawer underneath a pile of something?
At 5:30, my computer goes away. I don't check email. I don't apologize for not checking email on the weekends. I make certain to do something for myself or for my family together. The sort of activities that Tonya and McLean have been speaking about. So I turn it off, and I don't, as you have said, I choose not to expect myself to do more than what I'm capable of doing in a regular workday. And that we are supposed to, as you said, I mean, we're supposed to produce all the time. We are little producers. And as I'm sure any one of our any of us here, any one of our activities we're doing for our income or for our future career or for our families or for our communities, any one of these things could fill 24 hours a day if we let it. So there's no reason it should fill more than 8. I mean, unless of course we have to pay the rent, right?
I love that. If 8 is the goal, I think lots of people on the phone have a lot of work to do. Yeah. But it goes back to McLean saying, I would be the type who says, I'm going to run a marathon. But I love the idea that there's actually progress being made in just buying the clothes. So for
Perfect.
Tonya and McLean, you're in, sort of frontline care. You're dealing with people in healthcare situations. You're seeing them at their most stressed, which, we've seen a ton about how exhausting COVID has been for healthcare workers. So same for you. How do you turn that off and implement some of the suggestions that Tonya, you suggest to the women that you meet with, and McLean, the 4 things that you listed, which I'm sure are the result of a lot of experience. How do you fit that in?
Well, one of the things that we've done, I'll disclose this about my own family, is that we realized early on that we were going to need to have some dedicated time just for the family time, because dinner time doesn't always happen at the same time for everyone, but the family time, we know when it is on our watches, and it gives us an opportunity to be together, but it also gives us some time to go over some readings. We've been reading books together, vocabulary words. We look at Black history throughout the year, not just February, and we're looking at questions that we've put in a jar, a glass jar, like things. Any question is something that we
Fair
can
game.
tap into. Exactly. And
So give
then
us a for instance of what one of those questions. I'm already still stunned that your kids are happy to do vocabulary words with you, but we'll talk about that on another panel. What would be an example of a question that would engage your entire family?
yes. So someone in our family, I still don't know who, wrote a question on a slip of paper that says, is it our ethical responsibility to care for the poor, especially in the context of COVID?
That
So
had to
then
be
we
a
talked
long
about
dinner.
that.
That's a complicated question.
And so, we're a family of faith. And so we certainly brought a faith component into the conversation. But, in the context of those conversations, we're not really looking for right or wrong answers as much as the thought process. So why did you say yes? Or why did you say no? And what are the reasons behind that? So on the family level, having dedicated time to do that has been helpful. But on another level, on a personal level, and I'd say this is also true of the other women that I work with, it's really important to sort of figure out, when are we going to make the time to do things that bring us pleasure without multitasking? And that can especially be a struggle.
You're allowed. I didn't even know that was allowed.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. But yes, that is the goal, that we are trying to just enjoy, because mindfulness is one of the things that we often talk about, but we have to practice it. It's not just a theoretical notion.
And then what do you do when you're working with people in your ministry, or seeing people who come into the center, when helping them means it might interfere with your family time, or the questions that you're putting in the jar? Because one of the great causes of stress is having to play too many roles at the same time. So I imagine during COVID, there have been times where someone has needed you at work and you're under stress because you want to turn off and have some time with your family or your children or whatever the case may be.
Yes, yes. So it's the dialectic of living in the moment, of saying, I am going to use this COVID opportunity to strengthen my boundaries even further. And there are many, many people who need our services. And so what that looks like personally is flexing my time. It used to be that on Fridays, I would be enjoying lunch with friends and a massage. And now I'm actually spending more time helping to support my providers. But then when about 5 o'clock comes on Friday, maybe 5:30, I'm literally doing something very similar to what Katherine was talking about. And I was sharing that the other day with some practice owners that I was on a mastermind group with, and they were all like, oh my gosh, we could never do that. And, it's painful to kind of catch up later because I did that. But that's one of the strategies that I use, and I encourage others to use with those boundaries.
I'm curious, you mentioned that you're a faith-based family, and we've talked about some of the more destructive behaviors that people have engaged in during COVID. Faith seems like a more positive behavior. Are you seeing more people turn to faith or reevaluate their faith or make renewed commitments? Are you seeing any changes in that kind of behavior in the work that you do?
I am finding that people's faith is really being challenged and tested, to be quite honest with you. And I think that is a necessary part of the transformation that all of us go through in life. And so I think in some ways, some people are using their spirituality or their faith as a way to turn more toward spiritual resources. And we think that is healthy. I also think that we have to be careful because sometimes our faith might actually promote the missed opportunities for pleasure. And I don't just mean this is good, this is bad, but you should give, and don't
I
be
see.
selfish, just always be selfless. And I try to help people reinterpret scripture as I was taught at Duke Divinity School so that there is a greater understanding of where that balance is between loving God, neighbor, and self.
It's fascinating.
Yes.
McLean, how about for you as well? You're in the front lines, you're dealing with people all day. It's stressful, it's demanding under the best of circumstances, and under COVID, probably even more so. Do you have time to do those 4 things? It sounds great. And I'm sure lots of people will leave this call saying, okay, I'm going to start that. And I'm just determined to do the shopping part. If nothing else, I'm going to at least accomplish that. How do you do that? Because you're always in a situation, I'm sure, where you have conflicts between the many roles that you play.
Yeah, so to be really honest, I don't think I have it as figured out as Tonya and Katherine do. So I just have to put that out there. It's been a lot of trial and error, and I think it's messy. And so a little bit of it is just kind of accepting that it has to be messy, and then I'm just doing the best I can. And to try to remind myself to see my family as the group of people who can help me figure this out. But I have to tell them about it. And so, to speaking to what Tonya was mentioning about kind of mindfulness, I have to be mindful of what's going on inside of me. And sometimes I don't want to do that. Sometimes I just want to shut it off and binge watch something on Netflix. But I have to pay attention to what's going on inside of me, or else it's just going to hit a point where I can't do anything anymore. I get overwhelmed. And so that's really kind of where I've gotten to, is kind of having this mantra of, I don't have any choice. I have to do something different. I have to set a limit with work, with the emails I'm responding to, that I need to do that in any kind of leadership role that I have, that if I'm emailing people in the evenings on the weekends, then they might feel pressure to respond to me. And then they're getting that blur between life and work that makes it harder for them.
So you feel sometimes your behavior might be contributing to other people not having the balance that they might need.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, just to answer your question, I do all those things in waves. So when I need to go outside and run, then I go and do that. And then when I'm trying to get in some sort of movement and exercise and I haven't been able to fit it in today, then I just stand up, or I do push-ups for as many as I can do in that moment. But really just giving myself kind of that grace to just be messy and not all put together.
So Katherine, when you're in the classroom or you're in the world of your books, how do you find that pop culture is being informed by COVID particularly? So, you see a lot of those of us who occasionally watch several hours of TV, a lot of the shows now have the actors with masks, and you're talking about the specific problems that people have. Are you seeing aspects of popular culture in the work that you do in the classroom that might change as a result of COVID?
I don't know that I have, I don't know that I have anything to say to that. I mean, I think that we are straddling, we are straddling a moment where we feel greater intensity than ever. And as McLean has so wonderfully pointed out, this moment of crisis and emotional stress for all of us, everyone in the world. And I think that in some ways it's wonderfully comforting in a strange way, because we are often, as women, we struggle by ourselves and on our own because we are responsible to so many others. But also at the same time, we are embracing the strangest kind of joy, in joy in these little things. And Tonya, McLean, what you just said about, you're just this moment, I'm going to stand up. And tomorrow, maybe I'll go
Tomorrow I'll
on
do a
that
jumping jack.
5-mile walk, right? And Tonya, I love the question jar and how you were so intentional about this in your family. And I think there are moments, and I see this, my son, is always bringing up hilarious memes that he's either making up or finding on the internet and the various places he does chats on the internet. And there is so much, there are these little bursts of joy all over popular culture right now. I think going back to Bridgerton, which is, very much in my emotional imagination right now.
I feel better about myself, by the way, that I was obsessed with it and you write these novels for a living and still
right, yeah, no, exactly. So I also teach a course on the romance novel. So this is so it was technically work. I can't believe I just said that. Anyway, but I think one of the reasons why so many people are watching this series, binge watching this series, is not only that there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of romance readers in the country and in the world that have Netflix and are watching this, but also because it's fun, it's joy, it's pleasure. It's all about the pleasure. It's all about the joy. And we are diving into that in little ways or big ways, whether we're making a hilarious meme that we're sharing with our friends, or whether we're having a wonderful conversation at the dinner table, or we're just standing up and stretching and turning on our favorite song. I think we're doing a lot of that. And you see that in social media, you see that on TV, you even see that in the newsroom, you'll be listening to the radio. So in the midst of crisis, allowing ourselves to feel joy, I think that's important. That's what I see as it's something that's certainly it's in the classroom. Certainly I see that in my students right now too.
The topic of the panel was guilty pleasure. We started lowering the bar to just talk about pleasure. Then we're talking about the simplest things that you can do. I wanted to turn it around to all of you as professionals. And I wish Sonia had been able to join us, who is an expert in leadership and speaks on these topics all the time. Do you find for yourself personally, or maybe even some of your colleagues, that there is some guilt around the pleasure of being successful in your field?
I think to the degree that my work engages a lot of suffering, there would be one way to kind of think about, wow, more people are suffering than ever. Business is great.
Booming.
And it truly is. However, I think the joy comes not that people are suffering, but that myself and the other providers at the Armstrong Center for Hope are making a difference.
Well, that you've built this organization that supports people.
Exactly. And we've been well posed to be able to provide telemental health, and we're doing services that are accessible to more people now because of them being virtual. And there are opportunities even to reach other parts of the state that we didn't before. So in that way, it sort of takes the lemon of suffering, if you will, and turns it into the lemonade of helping more people, not only in terms of emotional stability, because emotional regulation is something we've been working on a lot with our clients, and especially younger children who really have difficulty with virtual learning, but we're also helping people to still focus on, though it seems very inaccessible now, this idea of wellness. Like wellness is still a goal, that we're not just trying to survive, although some people in some stations are, but we're also still having the goal of being well, truly well, by taking advantage of these self-care strategies.
It's terrific. McLean, for you honestly would need a business card the size of a billboard for all the degrees. How do you take any time to focus on the fact that you're successful in your field and many fields, and you're an expert in your areas? Is that even something that makes it on the list?
Honestly, no. It's really just trying to do the work well. And I think that that's always been something that's important to me. But I think there's some real value to taking a moment to consider what success you have had, and then how you can mentor others potentially as well, do that too.
There's something to saying it out loud. I have a friend who became an artist, and she was very comfortable referring to herself as an artist. It was a new career. And I would refer to myself, because I've always been in the business of consulting, when I wrote a book, that I wrote a book. And she had kept saying to me, no, you're an author. You're not someone who wrote a book. You're an author, which somehow feels like a bigger, more important thing, which pales in comparison to Katherine's 23 books. So I'm curious, how long did it take you to get comfortable with saying, you know, I've written 24 books, I've written bestsellers, I'm a professor at Duke?
I don't know that I'm even comfortable now. I am. I brought a show and tell. Can I show a show and tell? So
sure.
This is when I.
This is very sophisticated. We have audio visual
really
things happening.
Audio visual, and it's a good show and tell. So in the moments when I am, you know, like we all are, all 153 of us in this room, right? Like feel uncertainty about who we are, what we've done, what we're doing at this minute, or what we have to do tomorrow. One of the things I do is what I've started to practice this actually is I pick up one of my books and I open the first page and I forget, like I know what they're about and I remember the characters, but you know, I wrote some of them 10 years ago and I'll start reading and I remind myself that it's good. You know, I mean, I do the simplest thing. So ready for my show and tell?
Yeah.
Excuse me, I'm just gonna have to go off screen for a second.
Yes.
So this is my last book, and this is a poster. So sometimes I just put this in front of my you know, in front of the hallway. I'll put one of these posters, and I got them, you know, from my publisher when we were doing events. So we do signing events, and if a reader didn't take the poster away, they'd be there at the end of the night. So I have some of these. I'll just, you know, put them there at the end of the hallway and be like, hi. So I think those moments, just those moments, and as Tonya McLean said, just the moments where you remember that. And I think it's wrong of us to dichotomize the we serve others and we feel pleasure, because we need to be able to separate it, right? We need to be able to acknowledge that sometimes we are not experiencing pleasure, we are not happy, we are overworked, we are stressed, we feel that there are many demands on us. We need to be able to acknowledge that, of course, but we can also take great joy in making others happy. So I think it's the balance.
I think there's also something around expectations. Honestly, there's a theme. I keep going back to the shopping, but when I speak to students at Duke and at other universities, one of the things that I'm always stunned by is they repeat this concept that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And I think that setting the expectations that way is a recipe for disaster. I love what I do. I love building businesses in sexual health, but there are plenty of days I know that I'm working. We have about 9 or 10 more minutes, so I wanted to get to some of the questions. And there was one that particularly caught my eye. It reminded me when Tonya was talking about how enthusiastically her family participates in the activities. But Sue had a question that says, what strategies can you suggest to carve out time for yourself when not everyone in your life gets that you need to? So you have these high hopes of taking care of yourself, but it's sort of not on anybody else's agenda but yours. Thoughts about how you help people manage that? I guess I would point to McLean to answer that one first.
Oh, okay. So I think it's first just saying, I'm not asking for permission as much as I'm saying, this is what's happening, and I'm going to work with you to make sure that if things need to be taken care of, if there are young children, there needs to be another adult there. You definitely want to make sure that everything is safe and taken care of, but for it to be less of, I need to convince you that this is important, but just to say, this is important and this is happening.
So this is not a discussion that we're having as a group, that we're looking for consensus. Tonya, how about for you? When people aren't on board with the plan, whether it's in your home or with some of your clients?
So I am going to invoke a commercial that some of you all may have seen. It's a Pepperidge Farm commercial where a woman is in the bathroom. She is not in the tub because the tub is filled with the kids' toys. She's sitting outside of it, eating her cookies with great pleasure. And when the kids knock, she says, "It's Dad." And so she has carved out this time and said, here's a boundary that you may not cross. And I think that we often are better, as mean as it feels sometimes, that we really do have to establish and maintain those boundaries. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, as McLean is saying.
You guys are badasses. I wish I knew you when my kids were little. There are a couple other themes that seem to be coming up on the chat, but I leave it to Jen. Do you see any questions that you would like us to address with the panel?
So there was one question, do any of you see this as a period, this period as a catalyst for improving life balance challenges that already exist? This one was specific for K-12 teachers, but I think the life balance challenges, definitely stretch beyond a teaching role. So if you guys would like to comment on that, maybe Katherine, you start.
I think I'm going to turn this to Tonya and McLean. I think that this is appropriate. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say that we're definitely, from this experience of the pandemic and also recognition of racial injustice that's been happening, I think in a way that a lot of us have not really come to terms with. What we're seeing is we're becoming more aware that there are cracks in our foundation. And so I think it absolutely could be a catalyst. That's what I would hope. And yet things do have to be different. We have to interact differently. We have to have different expectations to not be, human doers completely, but to also see each other as human beings. And so, yeah, I have a lot of hope that will happen, given that, but it does take work to get there.
Absolutely. And I think our greatest challenge will be as COVID dissipates and as we return to our new normal. I think we all agree that there will not be the old normal waiting for us, but that we really have to claim the lessons learned in COVID and the strategies produced, the pleasure that was found, and how do we maintain that pleasure even when we can go to all these places and do all of these things and be present in ways that we haven't been able to. So the challenge is for us to, I believe, capture the most important priorities and truths of this moment and remember them and continue to instill them in our families.
And I'm going to segue that into what we often call guilty pleasure, again, in the world of sexual enjoyment and satisfaction. One of the things that is so clear in the space is that there's a real discomfort, obviously, talking about it, especially, I would say, especially any category, but female enjoyment seems to be particularly terrifying to people. But what's interesting is that when you look at the research, there are 7 or 8 life-changing benefits of having a pleasurable, active, engaged, intimate life, however you define that. Whether it's cardiovascular health, skin health, you actually live longer. It's helpful for pain reduction. So the pleasure receptors and the pain receptors interact so that they've demonstrated that in the experience of having an orgasm, it increases your pain threshold. So it doesn't just feel good. If that's not a good enough reason, there are all these other health benefits. So I wasn't necessarily making, trying to sell the idea of people having sex, but the idea that all these conversations are so big and so important and so multifaceted. When we were talking about McLean at the beginning, and this is, I think, happens in Tonya and Katherine's work and mine as well, we're not just talking about people's emotional health. We're not just talking about their behavioral health or their emotional health or their family health. But one of the things that COVID has done, at least from women's health, is create a narrative about a much more holistic approach. We can no longer just think about health as separate from mental health. Mental health now is being factored into everything we do. We can't think about cardiac health as separate from bone health or nutrition. It requires a much more comprehensive look at all of these things.
Absolutely.
Erica had made a comment, and I just want to end with a question. The statement was made that it seems dads or men, and sometimes they're both, sometimes they're one or the other, seem to be much better at setting these boundaries. And I would then also add, perhaps finding ways for the guilty pleasures. Is that your experience in the work? I'll ask you in your workplace, so you don't have to answer about your home life if you don't want to.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
That was easy. That was a layup.
Agreed.
And we might go back to the multitasking comment. It's easier to find time for pleasure if you're not doing 75 things at the same time. Well, we're running up on the hour. I want to thank all of you so much for sharing your wisdom and all your degrees and your senses of humor. And thank you for all the work that you do in your daily life and what you've done to expand our thinking tonight on this call. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you to all of you. I actually have one last question for you. So if you had an hour to yourself, how would you spend it, Rachel?
Well, now after speaking to McLean, I'll be doing a lot of online shopping, but I would say that for me, it is either exercise or any show, movie that literally takes me out of my life so that I'm so focused on these characters that I don't think about anything real. So I like sort of escapism entertainment.
And Tonya?
I would be on a heating padded massage table with a supremely gifted massage therapist.
Oh,
Absolutely, every time.
Yeah, that sounds blissful. Katherine, how about you?
I think I'd be with my dog outside, outdoors, somewhere with my dog.
Okay, McLean, that's last.
Well, I think I'm going to go with most of the participants. Reading, fire, scotch or wine.
Oh, yeah.
Any of those work?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, lots of great ideas in the chat. Well, I wanted to thank you all for joining us this evening. I really appreciate your time and expertise and the thoughtful responses that you have provided the entire audience. For those of you that are joined us late or may have only been able to catch snippets here and there, the whole session will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, and you will get the link in your email tomorrow. The one downside of doing everything virtual is we don't have the opportunity to applaud when we finish these wonderful sessions and whatnot. So I'm going to stop because I thought that was awesome. It's rare that I actually get a chance to sit back and listen to the conversations, and I started taking notes and whatnot. So I really appreciate all that you do for Duke, all that you have done this evening, and I look forward to seeing everybody in another program sometime in the future. So have a great night. For those of you that are going to the Zoom call in New York, I will see you over there as well.